So you see we have something here which I will call not philosophy, except in the most ancient sense of basic curiosity. I prefer to call these disciplines ways of liberation.
Psychiatrists afterwards, and common sense, they all said this is nonsense. You couldn't have had these experiences because there was no time, as the film shows, there's no time for you to have them in. And the psychiatrists would speak, and I accept this, that I was simply showing the symptoms of what they call the disintegration of the ego. I accept that too. At the same time, they didn't have the experience.
When I was a small boy, I used to haunt that section of London around the British Museum. And one day I came across a shop which had a notice over the window which said philosophical instruments. Even as a boy I knew something about philosophy, but I couldn't imagine what philosophical instruments could be. So I went up to the window, and there displayed were chronometers, slide rules, scales, and all kinds of what we would now call scientific instruments, because science used to be called natural philosophy. Because, as Aristotle says, the beginning of philosophy is wonder. Philosophy is man's expression of curiosity about everything, his attempt to make sense of the world primarily through his intellect. Thinking is a linear process, like writing. One thought after another. We say you can only think of one thing at a time. But that's too slow for understanding anything at all. Much too slow. And our sensory input is much more than any kind of one thing at a time. And we respond with a certain aspect of our minds to the total sensory input that's coming in, only we are not consciously aware of it. But nevertheless, you're doing it. But what kind of you is this? It certainly isn't John Doe. Isn't that little ego freak? And so if I ask you, who are you really? And you say, well, I'm John Doe. Oh, you think so? John Doe, tell me, how do you happen to have blue eyes? Well, I don't know. I didn't make my eyes. Oh, you didn't? Who else? Well, I have no idea how it's done. You have to have an idea how it's done to be able to do it. After all, you can open and close your hand perfectly easily. And you say, I know how to open my hand. I know how to close my hand, because I can do it. But how do you? I don't know. I'm not a physiologist. Well, the physiologist says he knows how he does it, but he can't do it any better than you can. So you're opening and closing your hand, aren't you? You don't know how you do it. Maybe you're bluing your eyes, too. You don't know how you do it. Because when you say, I don't know how I do it, all you are saying is, I do know how to do it, but I can't put it into words. I cannot, in other words, translate the activity called opening and closing my hand into an exact system of symbols.
When I recall it, and when I recall various other symptoms, I think the simplest explanation is that I had these experiences, that they were real, and that they took place outside time.
Because trying to understand the world purely by thinking about it is as clumsy a process as trying to drink the Pacific Ocean out of a pint beer mug. You can only take it one mug at a time. And so in thinking about things, you can only think one thought at a time, one after another, in series. So there's something a lot more to you than you think there is. And that's why the Hindu would say, that the real you is the self, capital S, the self of the universe. Because at that level of one's existence, one is not really separate from everything else that's going on.
What happens when you, if I were to say to you, now look hard at the television screen, really look at it. What do you do as distinct from just watching it in the ordinary way when you say, now I really got to see that? What do? Notice that you tighten muscles all around here, that you frown a little, you clench your teeth perhaps. Now what has that got to do with seeing anything clearly? It has absolutely nothing to do with it. Same thing when you listen carefully. Now listen, catch everything that's said, or you start tightening up around your ears. That has nothing to do with hearing clearly. Now, from the moment we were little children, when teachers in class screamed at us, "Pay attention," we go tight in various ways. Either to see or hear more clearly, to concentrate, or to will something which is supposed to be difficult to do. And that constitutes a habitual tension over the whole body that's there almost all the time. And that feeling of unnecessary tension is, as it were, the material sensation upon which we fasten this concept of I. We hang it on to that feeling. The concept is not us. The feeling of tension is completely phony. It has nothing to do with success in seeing, hearing, or acting. And so we get the marriage of an illusion with a falsehood. And that we call ourselves. And no wonder we feel cut off from everything, alienated, frightened of life and death. So what has to happen is we have to come back to a sane view of our own life, which is the way we really are, an organism functioning in terms of the whole environment, with the whole environment, instead of this funny little separate personality. But how are we going to do that? People say, oh, you can't change human nature overnight. You're asking us to give up the ego. And that's the most difficult of all things to do. Actually, it isn't. Because the ego doesn't exist. But of course, if you try to give up your ego with your ego, then it'll take you to the end of time.